In this video, we're going to look briefly at the vector and stack classes. So the Java collection framework that we've been looking at was introduced in Java 2. But before that, there were other data structures that were supported before the Java collections framework came to be. A couple of the ones that are in there are the vector class and the stack class. So those classes were redesigned slightly so that they fit in the collections framework, but their old style methods are retained for compatibility. So if you have old code that still uses a vector class or a stack class, it will still work. But it's an outdated way. You shouldn't use that for any new code anymore. So let's take a look where we're talking about here. If we look down here, collection interface, the list interface, the abstract list class, and here's our array list. And if you look, it's right next to the vector class. And the array list class pretty much replaced the vector class. So if you find old code that's using the vector class, you should probably replace it with an array list to update the code. So let's take a look at this vector class and this stack class. So the vector class is replaced by array list. It contains synchronized methods for accessing and modifying the vector. So what's a vector? It's just a list of objects. It's just a bunch of objects in a collection. You may have, if you've done any game programming in any environments like Unity, for example, and we're working with XYZ coordinates and quaternions and things like that, those are all considered vectors. They're just a bunch of numbers stored in an object. Okay. The vector class is not efficient for most applications anymore. That's why you shouldn't use it. But you might, like I said, you may see it in legacy code. Here's some of the methods that you can see for a vector: creating a vector, adding elements to the vector, checking the capacity, looking at the elements in a vector, much like an array list, right? I mean, there's not a ton of difference, except it's just not efficient anymore. So very similar in a lot of ways to an array list. This is more so that you know it and understand it when you see it, but don't use it for any new code. Let's talk about stacks. What's a stack? The classic illustration of a stack is making pancakes. I make pancakes, and as my pancakes get done, I throw them on a plate, and I create a stack of pancakes. The first one goes on the bottom, the second one goes on top, third one on top of that. When we pull pancakes off, we pull the top pancake off of the stack. Okay, so the last one into our stack is on top. And because of that, it's also the first one out. So a stack is last in, first out, LIFO, LIFO. Last in, first out stack of objects. The last thing you put into the stack is the first thing that comes off of the stack. And it's useful for a lot of things. However, it can be replaced by an array list that basically does the same things. The methods just aren't called the same. So sometimes a stack is, it was used quite a lot. I remember learning about stacks way back in college. So you can insert or remove an element from the top of a stack. So you can add things to the top, you can take things off the top, but you can't really get down take things off the bottom or take things out of the middle or insert things in the middle. Everything is the top of the stack. So if we look here, some of the methods, now these aren't lined up very well on this slide. Stack creates an empty stack. That's the constructor. We can check to see if the stack is empty. That returns a Boolean. We can do a peek, and a peek will tell us what the top element is on our stack. So we can peek at that top pancake. We can see it. Does it have chocolate chips in it? We can look at it. But we can also pop, and pop returns that element. So that's pulling the pancake off and using it for something, right? So peek is kind of looking at it. Pop is actually pulling the value off and using it for something, and it deletes it off of the top of the stack. Okay, and we can push things on to the top of the stack. So that kind of replaces what in an array list we'd put add, right? And the last thing every time we do an add, we add something onto the end of our array list. In stacks, this was called a push. We push a pancake onto the top of the stack, and then we pop it off when we need it. Okay. And we can also do a search and search through a stack if we want to. So that's the stack class. So vectors and stacks, both of them, the concepts aren't outdated, but those particular classes in Java are outdated, usually replaced by array lists.